It's been 6 months since I've been here, and I don't know if any of you remember the fact that I thought services were at 2. And so I had to cut my message very, very short. And actually, what I did was I've decided to redo it. So a little bit of it's going to be the same, but the rest of it's going to be what I didn't get a chance to do last time, and some things that God has taught me in between. I don't learn much, but every once in a while I pick up on something that He's trying to tell me. So that was added. And let's see, that's the second page. There we go. This looks like a lot here. Boy, look at all those notes he's got. It's 16 font print, so it's not that much. All right. What I mentioned last time was that Mr. Weber, a couple of weeks before I was down here, gave a sermon on how God interrupts our lives. And I was kind of playing off that a little bit to talk about those interruptions. And we all know what they were. If were born and raised in the church, then somewhere along your path to adulthood, you'd been taught all this stuff in the church and by your parents, and so you were learning it, but it hadn't clicked. And those of you who are young folks who are baptized know that there was a day that came along when it clicked, when this became suddenly important. Well, that's when you were interrupted. Your life, all the things you were thinking about at 12, 13, 15, whatever, and all those things took on a different meaning to you, because you now had a world view from God's point of view, which is what we need. The rest of you, probably like me, were listening to the radio, or maybe saw a TV show come on and it just caught your attention. I was driving home from work, and I was working. I'm an electronic engineer by trade. So electronic engineers work late. So I was coming home late at night, and I had a long drive. I was working up in LA, and I lived down in Orange County. So I had this long drive, and I was trying to stay awake 9, 10 o'clock, around in there. And I'd hunt for things to keep me awake, interesting things, not music. And all of a sudden I heard, does anybody know who Don Knotts is? Anybody know who Don Knotts? All right, those of you who don't, ask somebody who did. Don Knotts was a comedian and an actor on a show with, I had his name this morning when I was thinking about it. Anyway, it was a show in a little town of Mayberry, and he was a police officer. And he had a kind of southern accent, and he would talk a little bit higher voice. And I heard this voice on the radio talking about Jesus. What in the world is this? But the message was not like any I had ever heard before, and I just glued to the radio. And so the next night coming home, I dialed around. I forgot to write down the number on the dial, and I dialed around. I couldn't find it. About a week later, I found it again, and there was the same thing. Now, why was Don Knotts on the radio preaching? Well, it was Garner Ted Armstrong, and the radio station had sped up the tape so that they can get a couple more minutes of commercials in at the end. And a little bit of raising or speeding the tape raised the voice. Sound guys know all about that there in the back. And so that's how I got interrupted. Don Knotts preaching about Jesus. So one of the things that was said on that, this is a long time ago, but I've never forgotten this, was he said Jesus didn't have long hair. Now, I was a good Lutheran. Lutherans got this picture. You've probably seen it. It's a famous, iconic picture of Jesus with long, flowing, almost blonde locks and a very Western European face. This picture does not look like any Jew that I've ever met. At any rate, but that's the picture was in my Bible. So that's why didn't have long hair. Anyway, so I got interrupted, and so did all of you. And that was, if you were here, you know, that's what I was trying to talk about, was that that interruption. And my little note here said, God wanted my wife. What I've done since then, actually, as I've gotten older, I've started to see things in my life that were interruptions that I didn't notice at the time. I noticed the interruption, but I didn't realize that it was God interrupting my life. So I've gone back and thought about a lot of these things, and that's what I'm encouraging you to do, is to go back and look through your life, because it can be a key component in your faith, in your understanding of what God's doing with you. Now, long before this event with Don Knotts, let's see, I got to watch the clock. You guys know me, I tend to wander, and I'm the first speaker, so I can't go over. Anyway, I'll do about 20 more minutes. Sound right? Anyway, so my wife was not the kind of person that would ever listen to a religious program on the radio. Oh, she went to church most Sundays with her family. They would go to church. They would, you know, sit through the 15-minute sermon. And somebody asked me about that in the chat later, because I got a fun story about a 15-minute sermon. Anyway, so she was just a good girl. She's an only child, quiet of personality, and cute as a button back then. She still is. But at any rate, how was God going to get a hold of her? And he realized, or I guess he figured out, that this is how he would do it. He could do it any number of ways. God can do anything he wants to. But he decided he was going to get her hooked up with some guy who would listen to such a program. And so now she lived in Baltimore. I lived in near San Francisco. You know, how's God going to get us together? Well, he had me join the Navy. Navy sent me down here to San Diego for boot camp, and then they sent me to a base just outside of Baltimore for schooling. And I was there for a year. And I met her the second weekend I was there. She had decided to go to become a hostess at the USO. And one of the things that the hostesses would do is they would be available to dance. Now, the Baltimore USO was a very, very conservative, who's run by 5 older ladies. And those girls had to have a letter from their parents and their preacher in order to come in there and work with them. You know, it was a very proper place. So I went the first day I was there, I saw her come in the door, and I said, oh my, she's cute. Oh my. Then I lost sight of her. Next time I saw her, she was out on the dance floor with this coastie. Now, those of you who are Navy families know that Navy's not too hot on Coast Guard. There's a rivalry there, you know. We always say that you have to be 6 foot tall to be in the Coast Guard. That's so that you can walk ashore if your boat sinks. Anyway, so and this guy was just hanging on her. I mean, it was terrible. This was the 50s, and there's nice romantic music back in the 50s. Earth Angel, remember that? Some of you are smiling. Some of you aren't fessing up. So I knew the song, so when the song was ending, I walked across the floor to where she was. And this was back in the days when the guy would thank the girl for the dance. And so the moment he was stopping there thanking her, I walked up, can I have the next dance? So I beat him to it. And my mama taught me how to dance. I took her out on the dance floor, arms linked like that, and just waltzed her around the floor. And we've been together ever since. So God worked all that out. And there's more to the story. There's another thing. And now that I'm looking back on it, how did I get called? You know, God put me in that situation where I would hear that radio station and hear that message. How did she get called? God sent me from San Francisco out to Baltimore. Made sure that we met, that she decided to go dancing at the USO, and I decided to go to the USO just to get some company. And what I really wanted was a home-cooked meal, which she did invite me home for a Thanksgiving dinner about a month later. So, rapid romance. Anyway, it took us 2 years before we got married. Anyway, these are the kinds of things that you can think about. And I've got dozens of stories in my life now that I can look back and see God working in my life to get me somewhere or teach me some lesson or something else, and to figure out how those events went together to produce that. Now, let's go to Mark 4 and hear a story about somebody else. By the way, I'd love to hear your stories. I'm only telling mine because that's the only one I know. Well, maybe a couple of others. Mark 4 and verse 35. Through verse 41. Now, this is when Jesus had been preaching and he got into the boat and said, let's sail across the lake here, or they called it a sea, and because it was a big lake. And he said, let's cross over to the other side. Now, when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat, and other boats were also with them. And a great windstorm arose, and waves beat on the boat so that it was already filling. It was coming over the sides of the boat and filling up. And he was in the back of the boat. It's called the stern. Old Navy man. And so they went back to him, teacher, don't you care that we're perishing? Now, wait a minute. He's in the boat. If they were perishing, that would include him, right? And they're saying, don't you care? So they had a little bit of focus on self there. And he arose and he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased and there was a great calm. But he said to them, why were you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? So that was an incident in their lives that started to shape their thinking about Jesus. And you remember that later in John 6, when people were Jesus gave some hard teachings and people walked away, and Jesus said to the disciples, are you going too? And Peter said, now think back to this little marker there with the boat. Who can command the wind and the waves? Who can do that? And they said, where else would we go? You have the words of life. And you know, that interruption in their life in that boat started to shape their minds. And you can bet when they were listening to him teach after that, they were listening to him teach. They could see that coming. And so in Romans 8. Romans 8. Oops. Yeah. Romans. Comes after Acts, right? There it is. And verse 18, it says here, "We know that all things work together for good to those who love God." How many things have we gone through that were terrible when we went through them? They were rough. But now looking back, we see how they shaped our lives and how they shaped our relationship with God, that helped us to bond with Jesus, our Lord, and God, his Father, and our Father. It says, "For whom he foreknew, he also predestined." That's kind of a big subject. You can look it up. We know that God planned on having people. Okay, now some people, individuals like Jeremiah. You read Jeremiah. God says, "I knew you from before you were born." So there are some that might apply to in that sense. But we were predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son. So we have to get to know Jesus. We have to get personal, one-on-one in your life when he taps you on the shoulder or swats you in the back of the head. That happens once in a while too. Now let's turn over to Esther. Esther, what in the world could Esther have to do with this? I left her in here somewhere. Esther, verse 4:14. Okay, there it is. Esther chapter 4. Oh, I was so close. Esther chapter 4. I don't have it printed out here, so I got to read it. I can't fake it. Esther 4 and verse 14. Mordecai was telling her when she was having to make this decision, God had tapped her on the shoulder for a job. He interrupted her nice life there as queen in Babylon. Things were good. She was living like a queen. Can't beat that. Talk about, a princess. Mordecai was saying to her, "For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet no one knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this." And that's kind of for us too. We come to certain places in our lives because God planned it. Maybe we help somebody else. I don't know if you've ever had this experience. I'm going to guess that probably an awful lot of you have, where somebody years later in your life says to you, "You really helped me back here and then at such a time, and it really made a difference." And I'm saying, when did I do that? I don't even remember. Yeah, we were at your house for dinner. Yeah, you were? Okay, I don't remember that. Of course, I don't remember what I was doing yesterday a lot of the time, so that's all right. Anyway, for such a time as this, God needs you to know when he's tapping on your shoulder, so you've got to experience these things. And the best way to experience them is go back through your life and look at the things where you can see this fingerprint of God in your life. some little change, something happened. How did I get here? Take a look at some point in your life where you're going through something or being benefited by something, or where you know you were there to help somebody else, and ask yourself, how did I get here for such a time as this? How did that happen? Go back, think back through your life. How were you there for that person, or there for that job, or whatever it is, or there for that lesson? How did you get there? That's when you'll see God active in your life. It's kind of hard to do, just, as we just go along. But it's there. So along the way we have interruptions. And if we really look at them in hindsight's 20/20, remember that, and see the fruits of these things, or see how they came about, we will see the fingerprints of God. Praise be to our God, who was and is and always will be. He's the same all the time. And along with Andrew and Peter and the others, we will believe and be sure that Jesus is the Christ and the Son of the living God. Now I'd like to take a look at Deuteronomy 30. That sounded like a conclusion, didn't it? It was the old conclusion. But it's an important point to the second point here. If you'll turn to Deuteronomy 31. Down here somewhere, 31. Okay, and verse 6. God is talking to the people of Israel through Moses' second giving of the law. And in verse 6, he says to the people, "Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear, nor be afraid of them." Well, how can you do that? You've got to know God's there. You have to know that he's always with you, whatever you go through. Think about Daniel walking into the lion's den. He did so without fear. Do not fear nor be afraid of them, for the Lord your God, he is the one who goes with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. He's always right there with us, and every once in a while he exposes himself to us, that he is there and that he is doing something in our lives to protect us, to keep us well, to all the things that God does for us. And when you look back over these things in your life, you will see this in your life. Now, my last closing question for you, leave you with this. And I heard this preached 50 years ago, 50-some years ago. God doesn't want another Satan. And so to be in his kingdom, we have to be completely in with him. My question is, don't you think God needs to know that we also will never leave him or forsake him? He needs to know that to place us in his family. So the better we get to know how he's with us and how he doesn't leave us or forsake us, how much he loves us and what he's offering us, and we keep thinking about that and we get to know him because we see him active in our lives, then we will never leave him or forsake him. We've all seen people leave. I was baptized, one more minute. I was baptized with, my wife and I were baptized with 4 other couples, 10 people. We're it. We're all that's left. everybody walked away. So, and you remember when we had 600 people here in San Diego? 600 people? Where are they? Now, some moved away, some died, okay, but there's still a lot of them that sadly walked away. Never leave him or forsake him. He is our God.